The movie begins in an old pub in Berlin, with a strange hole in the wall, owned by an elderly man named Owen. On a stormy night, a guy named Neil arrives at the pub and insists on seeing the woman in the basement. But Owen vehemently refuses, saying he will find no peace through that door, only pain and suffering. Neil then offers him 2,000 euros and explains that he just wants to say goodbye to his deceased wife, but Owen is firm in his decision and tells him not to come back again. After Neil leaves, Owen creates a video message for the future owner of this place. He reveals that the property comes with a special resident named Baghead, who lives in the basement and is very dangerous. He states that whoever signs the deed of this property will become its guardian. Baghead will do everything he can to escape and venture into the world, but it's up to the guardian to prevent that. The owner cannot leave the house, or death and disease will follow him. He claims he will try to end Baghead's curse tonight, but he is not sure if he will survive. After finishing the recording, Owen goes to the basement, where we see a monstrous, deranged woman who is tied to her chair. He then attempts to burn the whole place down, hoping to end the curse once and for all. Unfortunately, this does not work, and he ends up burning to death while Baghead remains very much alive. The scene then shifts to London, where we see a girl named Iris and her best friend, Katie. Iris is facing financial difficulties. She was recently evicted for not paying rent and is now looking for a place to stay. Just then, she receives a call from a lawyer. He informs her of her father's death and asks her to come as soon as possible. The next day, Iris flies to Berlin and is horrified to see the charred, lifeless body of her father. She is the daughter of Owen, who died earlier, but they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The lawyer reveals that she has inherited a property from her father, and Iris did not expect her old man to leave anything for her. She didn't even know her father owned an old pub, and the lawyer takes her on a tour of the place. He explains that its various facilities have deteriorated and that it needs a lot of money for restoration. Thus, he will find a buyer and arrange to sell it as soon as possible. However, Iris tells him she doesn't want to make that decision yet and asks for some time. She decides to spend the night at the place since she is homeless, and although the lawyer doesn't seem pleased with the idea, he cannot refuse. That night, Iris calls Katie and reveals that her father abandoned her many years ago, so she doesn't feel sad. Katie insists that she shouldn't be alone during this difficult time and promises to fly to Berlin soon. Around midnight, Iris is fast asleep when she is awakened by a noise from the basement. Curious, she gets out of bed but sees no one around. After looking around for a while, she approaches the basement door. There are some spells written on the door, but she cannot enter because she doesn't have the keys yet. Suddenly, she feels someone's presence in her house and goes to check. It turns out to be Neil, and this frightens her immensely. Neil clarifies that he is not there to hurt her and that he just wants to meet the woman in her basement. Iris is confused and insists that there is no one there, but he insists that there is a woman in her basement. He needs to see his wife down there. Neil offers her 4,000 euros and even promises to give her more money if she lets him into the basement. Seeing the large sum of money, Iris agrees, since it could help her a lot in this difficult situation. She tells Neil that she doesn't have the key to the basement at the moment, but asks him to come back tomorrow. The next morning, Iris meets with the lawyer and expresses her desire to live in her father's old place instead of selling it. This disappoints the lawyer, but he does not try to change her mind. He gives her an old-looking deed paper, which she signs to become the owner of the place. He also hands her the keys and a tape with instructions that Owen left for the new owner. That night, Katie arrives at the house. Iris then talks about Neil, who gave her 4,000 euros and said someone lives in her basement. Shocked, Katie says that if that's true, it could be dangerous to live there, but Iris insists they can make good money from it. Believing that this is just something like entertainment, Iris says her father must have received a lot of money from people who like to be scared. A little while later, Neil shows up, and the three head towards the basement. The room is very dark, and there they find 2 chairs in the middle of the room. However, Neil's attention is caught by a large crack in the wall, and he asks someone to come out. The girls do not believe him and start talking nonsense, but then, suddenly, they see Baghead coming towards them. This creature has a sack covering its head and looks very deranged. Baghead does not obey Neil's orders and approaches Iris. But surprisingly, when Iris asks her to stay back, she obeys her commands, and Iris tells her to sit in the chair. After this, Neil sits in front of her. He gives her the ring of his deceased wife Sarah, and Baghead puts it in her mouth. Neil has never done this before, and he is going to tie her to the chair before she lets out a horrible scream. Her hands slowly transform, and Neil removes the sack from her head, only to find his mother, who died 20 years ago. Neil does not understand why his mother has appeared because he wanted to see Sarah. Then, he asks his mother why she took her own life back then, but she gives him very vague answers. After about 2 minutes, her eyes turn black and she tells Neil that she never wanted to have children, and that is why she hated him. But now, she wants to give him a kiss. Suddenly, she disappears from the chair and then reappears again. She pins him to the ground and spits water from her mouth. Here, Iris commands her to stop and puts the sack back over her head. Once again, Baghead obeys. She returns the ring to Sarah before going back to the large hole in the wall. After they leave the basement, Neil realizes that his mother appeared because the ring originally belonged to her before he gave it to Sarah. He also reveals that he forgot to warn them that speaking to a deceased person cannot exceed 2 minutes, because after that, Baghead will take control of the spirit and become aggressive. Despite the failed attempt, Neil is determined to see Sarah because he misses her a lot. Iris refuses because she has seen enough, but Neil gives her the money and says he only wanted to say goodbye to his wife. He also gives her his address and asks her to contact him if she changes her mind. After he leaves, Katie and Iris watch the instructions on video left by Owen for the new owner. The old man reveals that Baghead hears and follows only the commands of the guardian, whose name is on the deed of the property. She has the power to bring the dead back. Anyone who wishes to speak with their deceased relatives must speak only for 2 minutes. Otherwise, Baghead may start manipulating their minds and become hostile. He then admits that the more someone uses Baghead, the more powerful she becomes, so it is better not to use her at all. Or she will crawl into their heads, and even if they try to leave, she will bring them back there, with her sole purpose being to escape from the basement. Upon learning all this, Iris finally realizes why her father suddenly left her years ago. It was because he wanted to keep his family safe from the monster, but the lawyer ended up contacting her and brought her to the old pub. Meanwhile, a terrified Katie suggests that they should flee the place, but Iris does not want to leave because she has nowhere to live. She says Neil is very rich and willing to pay whatever it takes, and if they let him speak to Sarah one last time, they will have enough money to start their own lives. Katie does not like the idea, but reluctantly decides to stay for her friend's sake. The next morning, Iris returns to the basement and announces that she is the new owner of the place. She writes, "Do not cross" on the stairs to prevent Baghead from coming out. Then, she goes to find Neil to ask him to come back. Meanwhile, Katie uses a wine barrel to block the basement door. She then tries to leave, but suddenly, a frame falls to the ground. She portrays 2 unfamiliar men casually standing there. When Katie looks behind the picture, she realizes it was taken in 1972, and one of the men's names is Otto. Surprisingly, the other is the lawyer who arranged for Iris to sign the deed. Katie discovers that Otto used to own this place before Owen. On the internet, she finds out that Otto ended up committing suicide after a family tragedy. And then, suddenly, she sees Otto, but soon realizes that the man has disappeared. Elsewhere, Neil shares with Iris that he deeply loved his deceased wife, Sarah, who died in a car accident. Her death left him devastated, so he started attending a grief counseling group. It was there that he heard about Owen, who supposedly could connect them with the deceased for a fee of 2,000 euros. That night, Neil, Katie, and Iris go back to the basement. He gives Baghead an item that belonged to his wife, Sarah, and Iris sets a 2-minute timer. The monster immediately transforms into Sarah, and the last thing his wife remembers is the moment she was about to have an accident. However, it soon becomes clear that he didn't do all this just to say goodbye. He asks who she was seeing and with whom she was having an affair before dying, but Sarah denies such accusations. Just then, the timer goes off, and Baghead takes control of the spirit, claiming there was no other man, and she simply couldn't stand the thought of being with him any longer. At this moment, the basement suddenly changes to the scene of Sarah's tragic accident. Iris sees Sarah crying in a corner and cautiously approaches her. But then, Sarah transforms into a ravenous creature. The creature pins her to the ground and reveals that Iris is a prisoner of this place, before returning to the hole. After things calm down, Neil says he wants to talk to Sarah again. He claims he just wanted to move on, and doesn't believe what his wife said after the timer went off. However, Katie and Iris are tired of him, so they ask him to go home. Later, while Iris is sitting alone and drinking, she suddenly sees a vision of her deceased father. Then, she witnesses a scenario where Owen used Baghead to find his deceased wife and apologized to her for abandoning both her and Iris. For 20 years he was trapped here, unable to reunite with his family, and wherever he was about to see Iris, death and disease seemed to follow him. He finally decided to burn the property so that Iris wouldn't have to deal with the misery. However, after 2 minutes had passed, Baghead took control of his wife's spirit and ended up burning him. The scene then shifts to midnight when Iris suddenly hears some noises. She realizes Katie is not in her room, so she follows the sound and enters the basement. But instead of Katie, she finds her father, who tries to lure her into the large hole in the wall. However, Iris refuses to go and realizes her father's face has become insane. Then, Owen peels off his skin and reveals himself as Baghead. Iris tries to strangle her, but that backfires. Baghead reveals herself as Iris, and Iris wakes up in her bed, feeling a rope with a key tightly wrapped around her neck. Fortunately, Katie hears her screams and cuts the rope, saving Iris from almost suffocating to death. In the afternoon, the girls try to contact the lawyer so they can remove Iris's name from the deed, but he seems to have disappeared. On their way home, Katie worries about her friend's safety and urges her to leave the place immediately. However, Iris does not want to return to her normal life where she has nothing. She accuses Katie of being jealous now that she has her own property, and an annoyed Katie ends up packing her things and leaving the house. Despite the argument, Katie still worries about her best friend, so she goes to Otto's abandoned house. Inside, she finds a series of documents that show how desperately he was trying to escape the curse. Meanwhile, Iris goes to the basement and uses Baghead to find her father. Here, he reveals that he wanted the pub to burn, left no will, and didn't want her involved. Iris becomes furious with him for keeping all these secrets for so long, but he couldn't leave this place to see her before. He apologizes, pleading that she won't bring him back again. After this, a frustrated Iris goes upstairs, where she tries to burn the deed documents. But no matter how hard she tries, the paper won't catch fire. She then realizes she is trapped here after making a wrong decision. Sometime later, Katie returns to the pub and tries to call Iris repeatedly, but there is no answer. This is because she is lying unconscious in one of the rooms. Assuming her friend is in the basement, Katie goes down there, only to come face to face with Baghead, and she drops her things as Baghead swallows some documents that belong to Otto. As a result, Otto ends up coming back to life. Katie then questions him about who Baghead is. He reveals that 400 years ago, a cult called the Brotherhood discovered a woman who could summon the dead. They tried to abuse her power, but when she refused, they branded her a witch and burned her at the stake. However, she was resurrected and sought revenge. When she began to kill many people, the Brotherhood imprisoned her in an underground tomb through a dark ritual. But centuries later, descendants of those people opened her tomb to abuse her power again. The more they used her, the more powerful she became, and those who tried to exploit her ended up dead. As Katie hears this story, the 2 minutes run out, and Otto's spirit is taken over by Baghead. And as Katie tries to leave, the door slams shut. The next morning, Iris wakes up to Katie calling for help from the basement. She gets scared and rushes to help her friend in the basement. Iris hears her voice coming from beyond the large hole. Despite her father's warning to stay away from the hole, she goes into the wall to save Katie. Inside, she finds a deep cave and continues walking through it until she eventually finds her friend. But as they try to return, Iris notices the dead body of the real Katie. It turns out that the person behind her is none other than Baghead. The creature then tries to attack her, but Iris quickly gets up and escapes through the wall opening. Fortunately, Neil appears at that moment, and he takes her away from there. When they reach upstairs, Neil gives her some pills, claiming that this will calm her down. She then takes them and reminds Neil that no one will use Baghead again, so she will be powerless. Suddenly, she begins to feel woozy, and seeing this, Neil tells her to rest for a while. In the next scene, Iris wakes up and realizes it is already dark. She then rushes to the basement and hears Neil talking to someone. There, she discovers Neil making a deal with Baghead. He proposes to be the guardian of the creature and, in return, wants to keep in touch with his wife for the rest of his life. Neil even writes his own name on the deed paper, but it disappears again because Iris is still alive. Soon, Baghead impersonates Sarah and tells him that she was pregnant when she died. Neil was very controlling and insecure, so Sarah was scared and wanted to leave him. He even secretly drugged her to calm her down, but she ran to her car and ended up in an accident. Consumed by guilt, he starts crying. Then Sarah tells him that they can still be together, but they cannot if Iris is still alive. Neil insists that he is not a killer, but Sarah responds that he was the one who killed her and their child. Just then, Neil notices Iris listening to their conversation, so he chases her. She runs to her room and tries to call the police, but discovers that her phone is dead. Then, she panics and runs to the roof, but Neil catches up to her. Iris tries to have a logical conversation with him, explaining that the woman he was speaking with is not his wife and that Baghead is manipulating him. However, he refuses to listen and violently attacks her. Iris manages to break free and tries to descend to the lower floor, but Neil pushes her off the roof, resulting in her tragic death. After this, Neil carries her lifeless body to the basement and gives Baghead his phone to bring her back so she can put her name on the deed. Baghead swallows the phone, and soon Iris's spirit appears. Neil apologizes for killing her and says he just wanted to become Baghead's guardian and reunite with his wife. He then asks the spirit to transfer the property of the house to him. However, she maniacally thanks Neil for freeing her. She asserts that although Iris is dead, her name is still on the deed. Thus, with Iris's soul in Baghead's body, she becomes her own guardian and is free to leave the basement. Neil doesn't understand, but she suddenly begins to attack him. Baghead transforms into Neil's mother and breaks his hands. Then, she takes on Sarah's form and repeatedly slams his head into the floor. Finally, she takes on Iris's form, who picks up a chair and hits him, leading to his death. In the final scene, Baghead burns the deed along with the pub and steps away from the basement. With no one to control her or imprison her, she is now her own guardian and is free to wander the world.